So, Tom Parker Bowles has just been kicked out of a royal residence, and the thing that actually matters here is not the eviction itself. It is what happened during the telephone call right after, because that was the exact moment when the entire illusion that Camilla had built over consecutive years completely collapsed right in front of a music room filled with people witnessing it. Here is exactly what happened. While King Charles was completely away from the court, Tom Parker Bowles took it upon himself to break into the highly restricted private wine vaults beneath Windsor Castle. He did not just look around. He set up an incredibly luxurious, private wine tasting gala, plugged his professional wine-chilling units and high-end event lighting directly into the ancient estate power grid, and opened the heavy doors wide, as if he were the rightful owner of the entire sovereign collection. He even hung up a corporate marketing crest that looked almost identical to the official royal crest, but it was not altered just enough to avoid an immediate lawsuit. The guests immediately noticed the emblem. Some casual attendees could not understand what was unusual, but the seasoned collectors recognized it instantly and knew exactly what they were looking at. The only word that flashed in their minds was thief. Tom had been running this specific scheme for a while, just on a smaller scale. He would secretly bring wealthy corporate donors into restricted royal cellars, charge them exorbitant fees for exclusive access to taste irreplaceable sovereign vintages, and clear everything out before any official palace bureaucrats showed up. But this time, the game ended. The administrative apparatus of Princess Anne moved in with clinical precision, cut the main power supply to the vault's automated systems, plunging the entire luxury setup into complete darkness, and threw Tom Parker Bowles off the property. Yet, the real institutional earthquake was waiting just minutes away. As Tom retreated, a high-stakes telephone call was initiated back to the palace. Queen Camilla answered it on speakerphone, inside a crowded music room where senior courtiers and influential guests were standing. They heard everything. The voice on the other end did not use the polite, diplomatic etiquette of the court. It was cold, sharp, and devastating. The official on the line detailed the exact mechanics of the eviction and made it explicitly clear that the private wine collection is the sovereign territory of the bloodline. No non-lineage relative, no matter who their mother is, would ever be allowed to treat a royal estate like a private business. The social camouflage that Camilla had spent a decade weaving to elevate her children was ripped apart in less than 2 minutes. The witnesses in the music room watched the total dismantling of Parker Bowles' authority in real time. By trying to turn the historical inheritance of the Windsor dynasty into a commercial asset for wealthy corporate sponsors, Tom activated the ultimate self-defense mechanism of the monarchy. The telephone call transformed a quiet eviction into a permanent institutional boundary, proving that when the king is away, the true bloodline heirs will still ruthlessly protect their territory. The illusion is over, the vault doors are locked, and the message to the extended family is undeniable. Tom Parker Bowles, an established food critic and highly successful author within the British culinary establishment, had spent the preceding year developing what was intended to be his definitive literary masterpiece. His project aimed to comprehensively document the inner culinary history of the royal court, drawing back the heavy velvet curtain on the private tastes, grand state banquets, and historical consumption habits of the British monarchy across consecutive centuries. To elevate this project from a standard historical overview into a global publishing phenomenon, Parker Bowles required something far more valuable than public records or generalized court gossip. He required primary source material. Specifically, he sought direct, physical access to the highly classified contents of the Windsor Castle wine vaults, intending to personally inspect, catalog, and taste test historic bottles that have been hidden from public view for generations. The commercial and professional high stakes of such a literary venture cannot be overstated. A definitive, insider account of the sovereign's private liquid assets, penned by the reigning queen's son, would have commanded astronomical global publishing advances and unparalleled media saturation. For Tom Parker Bowles, the project was a golden ticket to global prestige, transforming his status from a respected British food writer into the premier international authority on royal lifestyle and heritage. However, what Parker Bowles viewed as a legitimate professional pursuit enabled by his unique proximity to the crown, Princess Anne viewed as a dangerous and unacceptable commercial exploitation of state-protected assets. The friction between these two opposing perspectives grew rapidly during the early weeks of 2026, transforming a routine academic request into a high-stakes standoff regarding the very definition of royal property and the limits of non-royal privilege. The confrontation itself, which took place within the secure subterranean access zones of Windsor Castle, represents a profound departure from the traditional, conflict-averse etiquette that usually governs the House of Windsor. According to highly placed palace insiders, Tom Parker Bowles arrived at the secure checkpoint leading to the historic vaults, equipped with research documentation and operating under the assumption of implicit permission from the highest levels of the current court. Given his domestic proximity to the sovereign's inner circle, he expected his entry to be a routine matter of administrative compliance. He did not expect to find the entrance physically and administratively barred by the Princess Royal herself. Princess Anne, operating entirely independent of traditional court couriers or royal staff, chose to handle the intervention personally, cutting through the usual layers of bureaucratic insulation to deliver a direct institutional veto. The interaction between the Princess Royal and the Queen's son was remarkably brief, stripped of all traditional diplomatic pleasantries, and characterized by a cold, clinical precision. When Parker Bowles attempted to justify his presence by citing the educational value of his text and the implicit domestic approval he carried, Princess Anne delivered a definitive refusal that left no room for appeal. She explicitly stated that the private wine collection of the royal household is not a commercial laboratory, nor is it an open-source archive for freelance journalistic ventures. She reminded him that the contents of the vault are held in trust by the Royal Collection Trust and the direct heirs of the House of Windsor, intended solely for the execution of state diplomacy and the preservation of sovereign heritage. The intervention was not merely an administrative denial. It was a physical reassertion of territorial sovereignty by a blood lineage princess against a non-lineage relative who had overstepped the invisible boundaries of his position. By altering the security protocols and revoking the digital and physical access permissions previously granted to or assumed by Parker Bowles, Princess Anne effectively drew a hard line in the sand under the foundations of Windsor. This action marked a critical turning point in the internal dynamics of the modern monarchy, signaling a transition from the polite, accommodating tolerance of the early transition period to an era of direct, uncompromising territorial defense. The message reverberated through every corridor of Buckingham Palace, Kensington Palace, and Windsor Castle. The extended family of Queen Camilla may be welcomed at public celebrations and family gatherings, but the core historical assets, the private intellectual property, and the symbolic treasures of the Windsor dynasty remain completely off-limits. As news of the incident quietly circulated among senior palace officials, the broader strategic implications of Anne's blockade became impossible to ignore. The Princess Royal's actions were not executed in a vacuum. They were a calculated preemptive strike designed to protect the institutional integrity of the monarchy at a time when the boundaries of royal privilege are under constant pressure from modern commercial forces. By treating the wine collection as a sovereign fortress, Princess Anne successfully checked the rising social and cultural influence of the Parker Bowles faction, asserting that within the hierarchy of the British state, lineage remains the ultimate arbiter of legacy. The vault doors remained firmly shut, leaving a highly ambitious author with an incomplete manuscript and forcing the entire royal household to come to terms with a new, uncompromising era of internal discipline. To comprehend why the Princess Royal enacted such an unyielding administrative blockade against Tom Parker Bowles, it is necessary to look beyond the immediate domestic friction and examine the immense historical and financial value of the asset she was protecting. The private wine collection beneath Windsor Castle is not merely a well-stocked pantry designed for luxury entertainment. It is an irreplaceable museum of liquid diplomacy. It functions as an incredibly valuable repository of the United Kingdom's geopolitical history, where every single bottle represents a past state visit, an international treaty, or a deeply guarded sovereign alliance. The collection comprises thousands of bottles of the rarest vintages on Earth, many of which are completely unique and can never be replaced. In the contemporary international market, the financial value of these liquid assets extends deep into millions of pounds, making the vaults a highly lucrative target for any commercial entity seeking to exploit royal heritage for global publishing prestige. The structural organization and modern preservation of this priceless collection were heavily influenced by the late Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, who possessed an incredibly strict and demanding standard for royal heritage management. Throughout the middle to late decades of the 20th century, the Duke of Edinburgh quietly dedicated significant time to the systematic modernization and strict classification of the Windsor Castle vaults. He viewed the wine collection not as a personal indulgence, but as an essential component of the sovereign state apparatus. Under his meticulous oversight, the cellars were transformed into a highly organized, temperature-controlled archival system designed to protect these delicate assets from atmospheric degradation and, crucially, from unauthorized domestic or commercial exploitation. Prince Philip established a rigid protocol ensuring that these treasures remained exclusively within the custody of the direct lineage heirs of the crown and the professional archivists of the Royal Collection Trust. By demanding direct physical access to this highly restricted zone, Tom Parker Bowles was directly challenging the administrative legacy established by the Duke of Edinburgh. The professional ambition of the Queen's son required him to meticulously inspect and describe specific, high-value assets that had been shielded from public scrutiny for generations. Among the primary targets of his intended journalistic survey were several legendary collections that carry immense historical weight. One such asset is the highly coveted collection of Pole Roger Sir Winston Churchill champagne, specifically the legendary 1948 special cuvée vintages. These extraordinary bottles were presented as a private gift by a prominent French count from the Epernay region to King George VI to mark the birth of the future King Charles III. They represent a priceless monument to post-war European reconciliation and the deep personal alliance between the British state and the champagne houses of France. Even more financially volatile was the targeted survey of the historic 1953 Chateau Lafite Rothschild collection stored deep within the Windsor limestone vaults. This particular collection represents one of the most valuable aggregations of Bordeaux wine in existence, presented as an official diplomatic gift by the President of the French Republic to Queen Elizabeth II during her first triumphant state visit to Paris following her coronation. The historical and financial valuation of these specific bottles is entirely immeasurable on the open market, as they carry the unique provenance of sovereign-to-sovereign gifting. For a commercial food writer to sample, grade, or publicly detail the condition of these specific bottles for a mass-market publication would instantly diminish their mystique, transforming a sacred state treasure into a commercial commodity subject to the whims of international culinary journalism. Furthermore, the Princess Royal was acutely aware of the presence of the ultimate crown jewel within the subterranean collection, the historic Tokaji Essentia 1993 vintage. This legendary Hungarian sweet wine carries a lineage that traces directly back to the twilight of the 19th century, when a spectacular consignment of this liquid gold was presented by Emperor Franz Joseph I of Austria-Hungary as a personal gift to Queen Victoria. Known historically within the court as the ultimate elixir of the royal household, these bottles possess a near-immortal lifespan due to their extraordinary sugar concentration and flawless archival preservation under Windsor Castle. The sheer historical gravity of these specific bottles elevates the entire cellar from a high-end collection into a critical piece of national heritage. The immediate administrative intervention by Princess Anne was driven by the realization that the commercialization of these specific assets posed an existential threat to the institutional integrity of the monarchy. If the son of Queen Camilla were permitted to publish an intimate, commercial evaluation of the 1953 Chateau Lafite Rothschild or the 1948 Pole Roger, it would create an incredibly dangerous precedent within the royal household. It would signal to the global public that the historical collections of the House of Windsor were now accessible to non-lineage individuals for private financial gain and professional advancement. The Princess Royal recognized that the true danger of the project lay in the inevitable comparison between the timeless, state-sanctioned purpose of these assets and the modern, commercialized lifestyle branding pursued by the extended Parker Bowles family. By locking the heavy vault doors and changing the security protocols, Princess Anne successfully neutralized this threat, ensuring that the liquid diplomacy of the past remains entirely protected for the sovereign execution of the future. The unilateral decision by the Princess Royal to bar Tom Parker Bowles from the subterranean vaults of Windsor Castle cannot be viewed as an isolated domestic disagreement. Within the complex matrix of the contemporary British state, this action carries deep geopolitical and constitutional significance, functioning as a silent war for institutional continuity during a delicate transitional era. By changing the security protocols and locking the doors to the liquid archives, Princess Anne was not merely guarding historical artifacts. She was actively protecting the delicate, unwritten constitutional boundaries that separate the permanent sovereign line from the temporary companions of the court. For decades, the public perception of the royal family has been carefully managed through grand public ceremonies, precisely orchestrated state visits, and absolute adherence to institutional anonymity. The sudden, calculated attempt by a non-lineage author to expose the private luxury assets of the crown created an immediate crisis of perception. If the intimate details of the 1953 Chateau Lafite Rothschild or the 1948 Pole Roger collections were displayed in a mass-market culinary publication, it would alter how the public views royal privilege. It would transform sacred diplomatic assets into subjects of consumer curiosity and tabloid speculation. The true escalation of this internal crisis lay in the changing international dynamics of the British court. With the transition to the new reign, the subtle integration of the extended Parker-Bowles family into prominent social spheres had already raised concerns among constitutional traditionalists. The proposed book project by Tom Parker-Bowles was seen as the first major commercial exploitation of this newly acquired proximity to the throne. Princess Anne, operating as the ultimate enforcer of internal royal discipline, recognized that allowing this project to proceed would establish an incredibly dangerous precedent. It would signal to the international community that the historical treasures of the House of Windsor were no longer guarded by strict institutional protocols, but were now subject to the professional whims of the Queen's extended family. By staging a direct, physical intervention at the Windsor checkpoint, the Princess Royal effectively bypassed the slow bureaucratic machinery of the court to deliver a swift, unappealable institutional veto. This decisive action sent a clear message to all factions within the palace. The core historical assets, the private intellectual property, and the sacred diplomatic treasures of the Windsor dynasty remain entirely off-limits to those without blood lineage status. The heavy vault doors remained firmly closed, ensuring that the liquid diplomacy of the past remains protected for its true purpose, the sovereign execution of the state. The true complexity of the tactical maneuver executed by the Princess Royal emerges when the situation is examined through the precise lens of British constitutional law and the long-term strategy of royal succession. To the uninitiated public, the sudden blockade of the Windsor Castle vaults appeared to be an act of personal territorial defense or a manifestation of historic friction between the traditional House of Windsor and the newly elevated Parker-Bowles faction. However, a deeper analysis of the timing and the underlying institutional framework reveals a far more profound motivation. Princess Anne was not acting to satisfy a personal grievance. She was operating as the ultimate guardian of the long-term stability of the crown, executing a preemptive legal defense of the direct line of succession. Under the unwritten British Constitution and the strict statutes that govern the royal household, the historic assets held within the royal palaces are divided into distinct categories of ownership and stewardship. The private wine vaults of Windsor Castle, containing the invaluable gifts of emperors and presidents, are legally tied to the long-term heritage of the sovereign line. These assets are meant to be preserved in perpetuity for the future reigns of the direct bloodline, specifically for the eventual ascension of Prince William, the Prince of Wales. By attempting to access, catalog, and commercialize these specific liquid treasures for a private publishing project, Tom Parker-Bowles was inadvertently encroaching upon the future inheritance of the true lineage heir. The structural twist of this confrontation lies in the absolute silence with which the intervention was conducted. Princess Anne chose not to engage in a protracted bureaucratic dispute within the palace committees, where the political influence of Queen Camilla might have created delays or compromises. Instead, the Princess Royal utilized her unique, unassailable status within the family to enforce a swift physical solution, effectively short-circuiting any domestic negotiations. This decisive action immediately shifted the balance of power back to the traditional core of the family, demonstrating that when the historical integrity of the crown is threatened, the authority of blood lineage will always override the temporary influence of marriage. By rewriting the security access protocols and physically locking out the Queen's son, Princess Anne effectively re-established a fundamental principle of the monarchy that many feared was being eroded during the current transition period. She proved that the extended non-lineage family may enjoy the social hospitality of the court, but they possess absolutely no claim, authority, or right of exploitation over the sovereign treasures of the state. The intervention under Windsor Castle was a powerful reassertion of the rights of the true heir, ensuring that when Prince William eventually ascends the throne, The historic inheritance of his ancestors will remain entirely intact, uncompromised by modern commercial exploitation. The true complexity of the tactical maneuver executed by the Princess Royal emerges when the situation is examined through the precise lens of British constitutional law and the long-term strategy of royal succession. To the uninitiated public, the sudden blockade of the Windsor Castle vaults appeared to be an act of personal territorial defense, or a manifestation of historic friction between the traditional House of Windsor and the newly elevated Parker Bowles faction. However, a deeper analysis of the timing and the underlying institutional framework reveals a far more profound motivation. Princess Anne was not acting to satisfy a personal grievance. She was operating as the ultimate guardian of the long-term stability of the crown, executing a preemptive legal defense of the direct line of succession. Under the unwritten British Constitution and the strict statutes that govern the royal household, the historic assets held within the royal palaces are divided into distinct categories of ownership and stewardship. The private wine vaults of Windsor Castle, containing the invaluable gifts of emperors and presidents, are legally tied to the long-term heritage of the sovereign line. These assets are meant to be preserved in perpetuity for the future reigns of the direct bloodline, specifically for the eventual ascension of Prince William, the Prince of Wales. By attempting to access, catalog, and commercialize these specific liquid treasures for a private publishing project, Tom Parker Bowles was inadvertently encroaching upon the future inheritance of the true lineage heir. The structural twist of this confrontation lies in the absolute silence with which the intervention was conducted. Princess Anne chose not to engage in a protracted bureaucratic dispute within the palace committees, where the political influence of Queen Camilla might have created delays or compromises. Instead, the Princess Royal utilized her unique, unassailable status within the family to enforce a swift physical solution, effectively short-circuiting any domestic negotiations. This decisive action immediately shifted the balance of power back to the traditional core of the family, demonstrating that when the historical integrity of the crown is threatened, the authority of blood lineage will always override the temporary influence of marriage. By rewriting the security access protocols and physically locking out the Queen's son, Princess Anne effectively re-established a fundamental principle of the monarchy that many feared was being eroded during the current transition period. She proved that the extended non-lineage family may enjoy the social hospitality of the court, but they possess absolutely no claim, authority, or right of exploitation over the sovereign treasures of the state. The intervention under Windsor Castle was a powerful reassertion of the rights of the true heir, ensuring that when Prince William eventually ascends the throne, the historic inheritance of his ancestors will remain entirely intact, uncompromised by modern commercial exploitation. The administrative shutdown enacted beneath the foundations of Windsor Castle did not remain confined to the subterranean limestone vaults for long. Within 24 hours of the physical confrontation between the Princess Royal and Tom Parker Bowles, the institutional shockwaves had traveled upward, piercing the quiet offices of Buckingham Palace and sending the senior tiers of the royal household into a state of high-alert crisis management. This was no longer a hidden friction over historic vintages. It had evolved into a profound, systemic dilemma concerning the public perception of the monarchy, the limits of non-lineage privilege, and the internal stability of a blended royal family during a highly sensitive transitional era. Every senior courtier, media strategist, and constitutional advisor immediately understood that the blockade had exposed a significant structural vulnerability in the contemporary court. The most acute and immediate consequence of the intervention was the profound psychological and diplomatic pressure it exerted upon Queen Camilla. As the reigning consort, her primary institutional objective since the coronation had been the meticulous cultivation of an image of absolute unity, dignity, and seamless integration within the traditional fabric of the House of Windsor. She had worked tirelessly to project a stabilizing influence over the court, ensuring that her family remained a quiet, supportive background presence rather than a source of public or internal controversy. The sudden, unyielding intervention of Princess Anne shattered this delicate equilibrium, thrusting the Queen's own son into the center of an institutional security breach and placing her in an incredibly difficult position regarding internal palace diplomacy. Queen Camilla was suddenly forced to navigate a precarious path between her maternal protective instincts and her supreme constitutional obligations to the state. To defend her son's ambitious publishing project, or to question the authority of the Princess Royal would risk exposing a deep, internal ideological rift to the international press. It would give immediate fuel to critics who argued that the rapid social elevation of the Parker-Bowles family was diluting the historic standards of the crown. Conversely, to accept the physical blockade without private protest would be a tacit admission that her family occupied a secondary, highly restricted status within the palace hierarchy, entirely subordinate to the strict discipline of the bloodline. This internal tension created a palpable coldness within the private apartments of the palace, as both sides of the family retreated behind their respective teams of advisors. Meanwhile, the media apparatus of the palace was thrown into a state of intense panic as subtle details of the subterranean standoff began to leak to veteran royal correspondents. The central challenge for the communications team was the management of public perception. In an era where the public demands absolute transparency, fiscal responsibility, and dedication to public service from the royal family, the revelation of a high-stakes dispute over millions of pounds worth of historic wine was incredibly volatile. If the public perceived the incident as a story of royal indulgence and elitist entitlement, it could inflict severe damage on the reputation of the institution. Royal strategists were acutely aware that the story could easily be framed as a cynical power grab, overshadowing the essential charitable and diplomatic work of the sovereign. To prevent a full-blown public relations catastrophe, the palace communications machine immediately sought to control the narrative by imposing a total blackout on any official discussion of the event. They quietly reframed the entire issue not as a domestic conflict, but as a routine administrative modernization of the security protocols governing the Royal Collection Trust. When international journalists began asking pointed questions about the sudden revocation of Tom Parker-Bowles' security clearance at Windsor, court officials insisted that the measures were entirely standard, part of a periodic review designed to enhance the physical protection of state-protected historical assets. However, this bureaucratic explanation did little to satisfy seasoned observers, who recognized that the clinical precision of the rollout bore all the hallmarks of Princess Anne's direct, uncompromising style of management. The escalation of the crisis became even more evident as royal commentators began to carefully analyze the public appearances of the senior royals in the weeks following the blockade. At official state banquets and public engagements, every single gesture, glance, and physical distance between the Princess Royal and the Queen Consort was subjected to intense media scrutiny. The public began to realize that the traditional, polite etiquette of the court was being used as a shield to mask a significant internal struggle for systemic control. The comparison between the two women became unavoidable. Princess Anne, the tireless servant of the state, who consistently topped the charts for the highest number of official engagements, versus the new court faction that traditionalists feared was attempting to commercialize the historic prestige of the dynasty. Ultimately, the true significance of the panic that gripped the palace lay in the realization that the internal dynamics of the British monarchy had entered a far more disciplined and restrictive phase. The era of accommodating transitional adjustments had officially concluded, replaced by a rigid enforcement of institutional boundaries. By refusing to compromise and by forcing the household to confront the reality of the blockade, Princess Anne successfully demonstrated that the crown cannot be used as a marketing tool for private enterprises. The reverberations of her actions served as a powerful reminder to every member of the extended court that behind the glamorous facade of modern royalty, the ancient, unyielding rules of lineage and duty remain completely absolute, governing every decision from the grandest state occasions to the quietest corners of the sovereign estate. The subterranean blockade under the ancient towers of Windsor Castle has achieved its definitive purpose, culminating in a complete and unappealable enforcement of institutional boundaries. For Tom Parker-Bowles, the high-stakes confrontation with the Princess Royal resulted in an immediate and permanent halt to his ambitious literary campaign. His definitive manuscript on the inner culinary secrets of the British court will remain permanently incomplete, missing its most coveted and lucrative chapter on the sovereign liquid archives. By denying him access to the 1953 Chateau Lafite Rothschild and the 1948 Pole Roger collections, Princess Anne did not simply protect historical artifacts, she successfully dismantled a commercial venture that threatened to compromise the timeless mystique of the crown. The ultimate resolution of this crisis provides exact fulfillment of the institutional promise that has guided the House of Windsor across successive generations. It confirms that the core treasures of the monarchy, accumulated through centuries of global statecraft and international diplomacy, are not accessible for private monetization, regardless of the domestic proximity of the individual seeking them. Tom Parker Bowles was forced to withdraw his research requests, returning to the standard spheres of commercial food journalism, without the unique, sovereign validation he had sought to secure beneath the castle foundations. The administrative protocols governing the Royal Collection Trust were quietly reinforced, permanently locking the digital and physical entry systems against non-lineage intrusion. This outcome delivers a profound and lasting lesson to the entire extended apparatus of the contemporary court. It establishes an absolute, clear precedent that while the modern blended family of the king may enjoy the social visibility and public hospitality of the palace, they possess no constitutional authority over the historical inheritance of the state. Princess Anne, operating as the silent but absolute enforcer of internal discipline, has redrawn the line in the Windsor limestone, proving that the authority of blood lineage remains the ultimate arbiter of royal legacy. The heavy iron doors of the historic vaults remain firmly shut, ensuring that the liquid diplomacy of the past is preserved intact for its true constitutional purpose, the future service of the sovereign direct line.